Hello, friends. It's so good to be able to be here by the fire. I wish I was at school with you and I could see you all in person and we could share some stories, but it's 2020, so I'm here and you're there. But we can still share stories, and I would like to start with a story from Appalachian Mountains. It's an old story, and many people have told it. It's called Old Dry Fry. Now, Old Dry Fry was a preacher man, and, well, they say that his sermons were so dry that you would have to take water into church. And they also knew him to be a man that loved fried chicken. While Dry Fry, he could smell a chicken frying, and his long old skinny legs would take him right to the table. People knew that he didn't have a lot of money, and everybody knew Dry Fry, and so they would invite him over for supper occasionally. And one of the women there, she says, "Well, Dry Fry, why don't you come on Wednesday night and I'll make you some fried chicken?" Well, he didn't come on Wednesday night. He came on Wednesday afternoon, and he watched her cook the chicken and make the potato salad and grits and green beans. Dry Fry sat himself down at the table, and everybody was just looking at him because the table wasn't even set. And so she had the children set the table, and he picked up his napkin, wrapped it around his throat, and he done picked up his fork and his knife, and he was waiting for that chicken to come. She was careful to put the biscuits on and the potatoes on and the grits on and the green beans, and then she sat everybody down and sat that big platter of fried chicken right in front of old Dry Fry. Everybody knew what Dry Fry would do. He had no manners. He dug into that chicken, and he with both hands, and he was eating it and eating it and eating it. And then he saw one of them chicken wings. He loved chicken wings. He popped that right in his mouth without even taking the meat off the bones, and old Dry Fry done choked right on the bone of that chicken wing. And poor old Dry Fry, he fell right off his chair, and he was dead right there in the kitchen. Well, the man of the house said, "Oh no, we done killed Dry Fry with a chicken bone. Well, they'll hang me for killing Dry Fry." So that night, after it got dark, he took Dry Fry's body to the neighbor's house. He sat Dry Fry right next to the screen door, propped him up as if he was just resting there, and went on home. Now, the next morning, that neighbor, he done got up, and he was going to check to see how the weather was. He was just going to poke his hand out there to see if anything was falling out of the sky, like rain or snow or hail. And when he went to push that screen door, it bumped against old Dry Fry, and Dry Fry fell right off the porch. And the neighbor, he saw that, and he says, "Oh my, I think my screen door done killed Dry Fry. Everybody knows Dry Fry, and they'll hang me for sure. What am I going to do?" So he hid that body all day, and that night he took that body down the road to his neighbor's. And he leaned old Dry Fry up, leaning against the old barn. Now, that neighbor, he come out the next morning to feed his chickens. And there was somebody standing right next to the granary door. He knew it was somebody trying to steal his chicken feed. So he done took his slingshot, and he aimed it, and he shot Dry Fry and knocked him right plumb over. Well, he went to see what varmint was that was stealing his chicken feed, and there lay Dry Fry. "Oh no," he says. "I done killed Dry Fry with my slingshot, and now they're going to hang me for killing Dry Fry. What am I going to do? Everybody knows Dry Fry." So he waited until nighttime and he went down to the river. Now there was a big rock that everybody knew about, and it was where Dry Fry did all his baptizing. So that man, he done braced old Dry Fry up and put his hand against his chin and against his knee, and he left him sitting there. The next morning was Sunday. All the people come down to the river because this was going to be the baptizing Sunday, and one of those people that came early was a little boy. He was kicking his rock down the road, and early in the morning he done saw Dry Fry sitting there, and he says, "Well, good morning, Dry Fry." But Dry Fry didn't answer. "Good morning, Dry Fry." Dry Fry didn't answer, and so the little boy done took that rock and kerplunk and threw it right at Dry Fry and knocked him off of his baptism rock, and Dry Fry sank into the bottom of the river. All the church people coming down the road, and the little boy went and hid because he knew that he had done killed Dry Fry and drowned him in the river with that rock. Well, the folks waited around a long time, and they decided Dry Fry wasn't coming, and they started talking. "Well, when did you see him?" And this one feller said he was at my house Wednesday night for chicken, and another said he saw him, well, he was on my porch, but he left. And another said, "Oh, I saw him out by my barn, but he's not there no more." So the folks, they all dispersed, and the little boy come out. And as soon as the little boy come out, Dry Fry come right out of the bottom of the river and floated to the top, and the boy fished him out and drug him up on the bank. That little boy, he didn't know what to do, and he was dragging Dry Fry down, and it just so happened two fellers were coming down the road, each of them carrying a big old gunny sack. They'd done stolen a bunch of hams and bacon and side fat out of somebody's smokehouse, and they were coming down the road. But when they saw the boy, they dropped their bags and they went and hid. The boy dragging Dry Fry down the side of the bank there, and he saw those bags, and what is this? He opened them up and saw ham and bacon, and so he took the ham and bacon out and he stuffed Dry Fry right into the bag and tied it shut. And he took the ham and bacon and went home. And those two crooks, they snuck out of the hiding place there, and they grabbed their bags and went on home. Now one of the fellers, they still had some ham and bacon, and the other one had Dry Fry. But he didn't know it. And he hung that bag up in the smokehouse at his own house, and he went to bed. And the next morning, his wife, she thought, well, now I'm going to have some of that ham and bacon that man done brought home yesterday with my eggs for breakfast. So she went out and she slit the bag, and out fell Dry Fry. "Oh my," she said, "Dry Fry has done smoked himself in my smokehouse, and we're going to hang." So she got her husband out there, and what are we going to do? Well, they waited till nightfall, they did, and they took their old horse and an old saddle, and they sat Dry Fry up on the saddle, and they tied his legs and they tied his hands to the horn. They put a board in his back so he sat straight up. And then they gave that horse a big old wallop on the back end. And that horse took off a running, and they said, "Horse thief! Horse thief! Somebody's stealing my horse!" That horse took off, and all the neighbors come out, and they were banging pots and shooting their pistols. And that horse just kept running and running and running way, way up into the hills. They say today, if you go out there in the evening time, sometimes you can still see an old horse running and running and running up in them hills with old dry Fry still hanging on. And that's the story of old dry Fry. Years and years and years and years and years ago, there were two brothers named the Grimm brothers from Germany, and they found a whole bunch of stories and put them together. And this is where we get Cinderella and Snow White. But they had other little stories that I always kind of liked, and this is one of them. The title of this story is called The Three Spinsters. Now, once there was a girl, a young lady really, and she was very lazy. She would not take the broom to sweep, and she would not bring in the water, and she would not scrub the pots, and she certainly did not know how to cook. And her mother tried to encourage her to do something, but she simply sat and sulked. At last, her mother grew very impatient with her, scolded her severely, and may even have given her a good whack. The girl cried out bitterly, cried and cried so loudly that people outside the house could hear it. And it just so happened that this day, the queen was walking down the path. And she could hear this girl crying, and she knocked on the door and said, "What is the matter?" Well, the mother was much too embarrassed to say how lazy her daughter was, so she said, "Oh, it is my daughter. She loves to spin flax into yarn. But I am a poor woman, and I cannot keep enough flax, and so she is very unhappy." Well, the queen said, "Oh, this I would love to see. Let her come to the castle, and she can spin to her heart's content." And so the queen took the girl to the castle. And she took her into the rooms. There were 3 rooms in all that were full of the finest flax and a spinning wheel. And the girl was told to go ahead and spin to her heart's content. In fact, the queen said, "I do not care that you do not have money or come from pedigree, but if you have great industry and are able to spin all this flax into thread, why, you may marry my son. We shall see." And the queen left her. Well, the girl, she couldn't have spun all that flax if she had spun day and night, if she even knew how to spin. It would have taken her entire life. And so she sat, and she sat, and she sat. For 3 days she sat, and the queen came back, and the spinning wheel had not been touched. The girl had made an honest excuse, said, "I miss my mother so." "Well, this may be," said the queen, "but tomorrow you will begin your work." And the queen left. Now the girl went to the window, and she began to weep, for she did not know what to do. And it just so happened that the 3 spinster sisters come walking along. Now they were unusual. One had a large foot. Her left foot was very, very large, and it went thunk-a-bunk, ka-thump every time she walked. And one of the sisters had a very, very large thumb. It was so large that it was as big as the palm of her hand. And one of the sisters, I hate to tell you, had a huge, huge lower lip. Her lip was so large that it would hang down to her chin. Now this sister also drooled a great deal, and so it was most unattractive. The three sisters came to the window and they saw the girl weeping. What is the matter?" they asked. And she explained that her mother had said she could spin flax into thread, but she could not. What was she to do? So the three sisters told the girl they would help her if, when she was wed to the prince, that she would tell the queen that they were her cousins and that they were to sit at the table with her at the great banquet. The girl agreed quite readily, and she opened the door and let them in. Now the three sisters were spinners. The one with the big foot would run the great spinning wheel. Thunk, 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 and each time the wheel would spin and spin and spin, and the one with the big thumb would take the thread and able to pull the thread with her great thumb, and it would come out. And the one with the great lip would moisten the thread, and then they would wrap it into big spools. The first day, they finished the first room, and they moved on to the second room, and the queen came. The girl hid the three sisters, and the queen was quite impressed. The next day, they finished the second room, all spun into the finest thread. And the third day, they finished the third room, and the three sisters left. Well, the queen immediately said, "You are such a hard-working girl. We shall plan the great wedding." And so they prepared a great feast, and the wedding was performed. And the girl said, "I have three cousins that are very dear to me and have helped me a great deal. I wish that they would come to the banquet and sit with us." The queen saw no problem in this, and she said, do invite them." So everyone was seated, and the three sisters came in. One with the great thump, thump, thump of her foot, and one with the great thumb that she just showed everyone, and one with this great lip. The drool was running down. And they sat down at the table with the queen and the prince and the girl. She welcomed them, and then the prince turned to the girl and said, "Why are your relatives so ugly?" The girl did not respond, and so the prince went to the first one and said, "Why is your left foot so large?" "It is for the spinning and the spinning and the spinning," she said. And he said to the second one, "Why is your thumb so huge?" "Oh, it is for pulling the thread and pulling the thread and pulling the thread." And the third one, he said, "Why is your lip so large?" "It is to moisten the thread as we spin." "Oh," said the prince. And he immediately went to his mother, and he asked that she write a great edict. And so she put out this decree, and it said that the new princess would never spin flax again, just in all hopes that she never grew a large lip, a large foot, or a large thumb. The Three Spinsters by the Grimm brothers. Mothers seem to have a sixth sense, they say, about when their kids are in trouble. And this is a story just about that. There was a mom, and she had 3 dogs. One was named BARNEY McCAY, and one was named Doodly Doo, and one was named Sue Dog. And she also had 2 children named Jack and Mary. Now, Jack and Mary they had been whispering that they were going to just kind of worry and fret their mom a little bit. So they went in the kitchen one late afternoon while she was fixing her dinner, and they said, "We're going to go on a little walk in the woods." They planned to go on a long walk in the woods, but she said, "You go for a short walk, but you be back at dinner time." And then she looked at him, and she kind of sensed that they were trying to trick her. So she said to Jack, she said, "Jack, take this magic kernel of corn," that she had pulled out of her pocket. She said, "If you get in any trouble, you put it on the ground." And then reaching into the refrigerator, she set a glass of milk on the counter. And she said, "When that little kernel of corn falls on the ground, I'll know you're in trouble because it'll turn red. That glass of milk will turn red. And then I will send out my dogs, Barney McCAY and Doodly Doo and Sue Boy, and they'll help you, you betcha." And then she gave a magic kernel to little Mary. And she said, "If you get in big trouble, you throw this kernel on the ground, this kernel of corn, and immediately a sycamore tree will grow tall out of the ground, and you climb to the top till the dogs get there." "Oh," Jack said, "we won't be needing these kernels, but we'll take them." And off they went. And they walked, 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 and they walked some more until the sun had gone from bright white to orange to red, and now it was starting to set, and the shadows were long, and they couldn't find the trail. And Jack said, "Mary, we got a problem." Mary goes, "What?" "I'm lost, and I want my mom." And he started wailing away, and so Mary had to give him a good whack and said, "Get a grip, Jack. We'll use the buddy system." So together they calmed down, and they took hands, and they walked a little further until they came to a clearing. And in this clearing, there was a cottage. Now, Mary said, "If there's a cottage here, she'll have a phone, or he'll have a phone, and we can call our mama." Jack said, "That's a good idea." What they didn't know was that in this cottage lived an old evil hag. And she looked like she was 197, and all her flesh hung on her like old wax. Her hair stuck out all different directions. She never had a good hair day. And her nose went straight out and then straight down, almost to her chin. She had 4 teeth in her head, 2 in the top and 2 in the bottom, and that was just to chew flesh off the bones. She was standing over a big old cauldron, and she was stirring up a stew, and it had fish eyeballs in there and lizard gizzards in there. It had rat and buzzard feet in there, and it had 100,000 cockroach legs. She took a little spoon. "Oh, it's a little oregano, I think." Well, now Jack goes right up to the door, and he says, "I got this, Mary." And he goes, boom, 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 boom. That old hag, she lays down her spoon and listens. She goes, "Who's that at my door?" Jack jumps back. "Whoa," he says, "did you hear that?" Mary goes, "Yeah, somebody's home. We can call our mama." "No, it's a witch. Did you hear how she said, 'Who's at my door'?" "How do you know that, Superboy?" Mary says. "You got super X-ray vision that you can look in there? If it's a witch or not, if she's got a phone, we can get home." Again, the old hag says, "Who's at my door?" Well, Jack says, "It's Jack and Mary. We're lost children, and we want to call home." Immediately like that old hag She says, I'm going to have them for supper, those plump little children. And she changed. She had on a little blue flowered dress and little blue hair with a little bun, and she had little bitty granny glasses and little black nurse shoes, and she hobbled over to the door with her little cane. She opened the door and had the most precious smile, and she said, well, come in, children, you poor lambs. You're lost, and I'm sure you're hungry and tired. Just come in. So she done invited them in, and she fed them supper, and they had stew, and they had corn on the cob, they had candied yams, and for dessert she even made them chocolate cake and strawberry Kool-Aid. After they'd done eating, she said, now I know you're tired, so you just go on up these stairs in that room on the left. There's 2 little beds. You just crawl in those beds. Give me your mama's phone number, I'll call her. So they gave her the phone number, and they went up the stairs, and she pretended to dial that number, but she just went beep, 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 beep. And when somebody answered, it was Sam's Meat House, and she goes, oh, sorry, wrong number. And she hung it up. Now, Jack had a kind of a bad feeling still about this old woman, and he said to Mary, he said, let's just look around a little up here. So they went to the room across the hall, and that room was full of pumpkins. So Jack says, let's take the pumpkins and put them in the beds so that woman thinks that we're in them beds, and then let's hide in that room and look through the crack in the door. And that's just what they did. And in the meantime, that little old hag turned herself right back into the ugliness that she was, and she went out and got her axe and started sharpening it and sharpening it and sharpening it. And she come back in, and she crossed over into the hallway and up those stairs. She raised that axe above her head, and then she opened the door on the left, and she went over to those beds where those children were supposed to be laying, and she raised that axe and pulled back that cover, and pumpkins, she said, where are those children? Now Jack and Mary had seen enough through that crack in the door, and they were down them steps and out the front door and into that forest as fast as they could run. In the meantime, that old woman was up there with that axe, pulling about blankets off every bed in every room and looking in every closet and under the beds. Where are those little children at? And then she glanced out the window, and she could see Jack and Mary running as fast as they could to the forest. So she put her axe in her belt, and she went downstairs and went to her broom closet. Of course, she had the magic broom, and she went to the window, stood up on the windowsill, straddled that broom, and took off flying after those children. Those children ran as fast as they could, and that witch was behind them. I see you little rugrats, you little crumb busters, I'm gonna get you. She would throw her hand out like that, and lightning would shoot out of the fingers, and it would hit the ground. And one time, one of them even bounced off and hit Jack in the behind, and he rubbed his bottom, and he said, I gotta get that magic corn out. And so he threw it on the ground. And as soon as he did, his mama back home, who'd been waiting for those children to come back, saw that the glass of milk turned red. She goes, oh no, my children! And she raced to their rooms, gathered up their clothes, went out in the yard, and made those 3 dogs smell those children's clothes. Then she untied them, and she says, go find my babies. But the witch was still chasing those children on that broom, and they were running as fast as they could. And Jack says, Mary, throw your kernel of corn. So Mary threw down her kernel of corn, and immediately a sycamore tree grew tall, 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 tall. And they climbed to the top of it. That witch came up to that sycamore tree, and she circled it and circled it. I got you now! I got you now! But Barney McCAY and Diddly Doo and Sue Dog took up the scent of those children, and they ran as fast as they could. Those dogs were galloping and galloping, and you could hear their breath going, "Master, I'm a-comin', Master, I'm a-comin', Master, I'm a-comin' on time, Master, I'm a-comin'." Well, Jack was afraid. And then that old witch took out that axe and she started chopping on one side and the other. Chop on the new block, chop on the old block, chop on the new block, chop on the old block. And that tree went crack. "Barney McCAY, hurry! Your master's needing you!" Barney McCAY stopped, his ears perked up, and he followed that sound, and off they went again, running as fast as they could. But in the meantime, she's chopping away. Chop on the new block, chop on the old chop. Chop on the new block, chop on the old block. And the tree cracked and leaned. Jack hollered one more time, "Barney McCAY!" That dog howled back, "I'm a-comin', Master, I'm a-comin', Master, I'm a-comin', Master." And those three dogs raced right up to that tree just as it started to lean this way. Now they circled that old hag, those three dogs growling, showing their teeth, their hair sticking up. And that witch, she put her axe down and she goes, nice dogs, stay, sit." But those dogs didn't stay and sit, no way. Those dogs jumped on that old hag and they started chewing on her, and she started going, "Ow, ow, ow, ow." And she took off running as fast as she could. She done run all the way to a bridge, she did. Those dogs chasing her. She jumped into the river. She started swimming down the river, and she swam right up to where the river bends. And where the river bends, my story ends. Since it is November, I would like to share this story called The King's Thanksgiving. Oh, the village was all abuzz about it. For the king had said the fine harvest had come in. The fields had been golden with the grain, and the orchards had been crimson with the fruit. It had been a good year, and the king was going to celebrate Thanksgiving. Now, children heard from their mothers, who had heard from their mothers and their grandmothers, the stories of the king's Thanksgiving. Whenever the king would have Thanksgiving, he would invite one child from the village to come and share the meal with them. The kitchens would be full of cakes baking and animals on the spit smoking, and there would be fresh strawberries when there were no snow on the ground, and there would be citrus there like lemons and oranges. The kids could only imagine what they tasted like. The tables were always set with the finest linens and beautiful napkins and fine plates. And whatever child went and spent the king's Thanksgiving was always given special gifts to bring home. So all the children began to get ready. And on the morning of the king's banquet, the king would send out a messenger, but this year he did something different. He himself dressed as the messenger and set out to the village to see what was the status of the people. First, he went to the house of the burgomaster. Burgomaster is like the great mayor of the town, and he had a fine house and a beautiful daughter. The daughter was dressed all in fine silk, and she had her hair all curled, and the girl had a hamper that was packed with sweets to give to the king. The king approached the girl and said, "Are you ready for the feast that the king would like you to be at?" "Oh yes," she said, "I'm in my finest, and I have gifts for the king. I am ready. But the king looked at the little girl for the longest time, and then he walked away, for she was not ready for the feast. Next, he went to the house of the captain of the guard, and the captain's son was dressed in a little uniform just like all the other guardsmen. He even had a small sword and a cap on, and he said, "Are you ready for the king's feast? To celebrate it the way the king wishes you to?" And the little boy said, "Yes, I am, and I have a sword. I can protect the king and his messenger all the way to the castle." The king said, "You are not ready." And he walked on. Now he went to the home of the baker. Oh, the baker, they made fine breads and fine cakes, and they measured their flour very carefully. They had very little left over to give to the poor, but they always had a fine sale every day. And the baker's son had an empty basket, for he was going to bring home good things for his family. "Are you ready for the king's banquet?" And the boy said, "Yes, I am." But the king could see that he was not ready. And so the king went all day from door to door and place to place and talked to children until the sun was beginning to come low in the sky, and there in the cobble streets in the poor section of town he found himself. And there, with the sun behind her, came a little girl in a ragged coat and shoes that other people had worn long before her. Her hair blowing in the cold November wind, and next to her was a little boy. He had a stick for a crutch, and his foot was all wrapped, and she was helping him along the cobbled streets as best she could. The king went up to the little girl, and the little girl's face broke into a bright smile. It was as if sunshine was coming right from her, and her eyes sparkled, and he said, "Are you ready for the king's feast?" "Oh," she said, "heavens, no. But my little brother is. For you see, he is lame, and he is very, very hungry. So I am bringing him to the castle." The king looked at the little boy, and he looked at the girl. He leaned down and he picked up that little boy, thinking he was heavier even than he was, and he practically threw him into the air, and he put him in the crook of his arm. The little boy's face too broke out into a smile, and the king said, "Yes, you are ready for the king's feast." And then he turned back and he looked at the little girl, and he said, "And you are too, for your heart is in the right place." And the three of them went to the king's palace for the great king's feast. May your Thanksgiving be filled with gratitude and the ability to see the needs of others. Happy Thanksgiving. Well, that just about does my time here around my fire. I hope you enjoyed my stories, and I hope that you read a lot, because reading makes your imagination go to places that maybe you will go and maybe you won't, but keep reading at Camp Read a Lot. Thanks a lot.